I'm going to start by introducing my guest. She is Nita Farahany. She's the Robinson Everett Distinguished Professor of Law and Philosophy at Duke University and the founding director of the Duke Initiative for Science and Society. She's a frequent commentator for national media and radio and a keynote speaker of events including TED, the Aspen Ideas Festival, the World Economic Forum, and judicial conferences worldwide. From 2010 to 2017, she served as a commissioner on the U.S. Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues. And she's also the co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Law and the Biosciences and the Board of Advisors for Scientific American. So welcome. And she has a new book coming out. Why don't you hold up yours, because it doesn't have the sticker that
called The Battle for Your Brain, Defending the Right to Think Freely in the Age of Neurotechnology.
And it's being published it goes on sale March 14th.
Tuesday, March 14th, this coming Tuesday.
Okay, that's great. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the book?
Sure. So The Battle for Your Brain, Defending the Right to Think Freely in the Age of Neurotechnology has been about a decade in the making, but it is, I think, more timely than ever. So I'll give a little backstory to it, which is I've been researching and writing as a law professor and a professor of philosophy about the intersection between law and neuroscience for a really long time. And in particular, what brought me to law and neuroscience was a very strong interest in the ways in which criminal defendants were coming into the courtroom and saying, my brain made me do it. As I explored those questions, one of the popular technologies at the time, back in 2012, was the use of neurotechnology for lie detection. We've always wanted this holy grail of being able to figure out when a defendant's telling the truth or lying. And there were two companies at the time, Cephos and No Lie MRI, who were claiming that they could scan and analyze a criminal defendant to figure out whether or not they were telling the truth or lying. And as I began to explore that from a legal perspective, I wondered whether subjecting a criminal defendant to lie detection through brain interrogation would violate our right against self-incrimination under the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution. Did we have a right to remain silent, and does that include our silent utterances? I wondered whether or not it would violate our sense of Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search and seizure. And as I began asking those questions and seeing the gaps and holes in our existing law, it became blindingly clear to me even then that the emerging use of neurotechnologies would fall into this space in which we don't have what I call a right to cognitive liberty, a right to self-determination over our brains and mental experiences. And so I started watching the neurotech industry, seeing as it was developing. And at the time, there were small kind of niche applications. People were using, at that time, consumer neurotechnology. And by that, I mean sensors that can be applied by wearing them through headbands or through now earbuds that would pick up the electrical activity in the brain. And they were using it for some niche applications like meditation or gaming as a way to speed up or slow down gaming. So I sort of set the project aside, watched as this was developing, and then started to notice that there was a lot of activity in that space. And that brings me to kind of the present day, which is what this book is about. And what this book is about is the coming age of widespread neurotechnology for all of us, the use of widespread consumer
what is neurotechnology?
Yeah, so I'm gonna describe that and explain it, which is it is really any technology that can decode activity and detect activity in the human brain. And it can be as simple as a device like this one, which you wear on the forehead and can pick up brain activity. But most of us aren't going to go about our everyday lives with sensors here and a headband here that is picking up our brain activity. Now, what consumer neurotechnology really is just like we have a sensor in our watch that picks up our heart rate, or in our rings that pick up things like temperature and your sleep activity and sleep patterns, or a Fitbit, which picks up the number of steps that you're taking, small sensors, which can now be put into other devices like your ear pods or into the cups that are on your headphones that go around your ears, or into a watch that can pick up activity that goes from your brain down your wrist. All of these are neurotechnology. That is, they're everyday brain sensors that will be integrated and are being integrated into our everyday multifunctional devices, just like heart rate sensors and other devices are. So this book is about the coming age of brain sensors integrated into our everyday devices and what that means for our rights, our liberties, the upside potential, and the risk of losing our last bastion of privacy. Do you want me to keep talking about it, or did you have a question? You look like you were on the cusp of a question.
Okay, you can keep talking. Okay.
So I thought on that front, on the kind of consumer wearables part, I would read a little passage from the first chapter of the book, just to animate this and help people understand kind of what prompted me to write the book. And so it starts with the first chapter, which is The Last Fortress. I hadn't known I would see the future when I agreed to speak at the 2018 summit of the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative at the University of Pennsylvania. But as soon as Josh Duyan, the chief strategy officer of a company called Control Labs, began his presentation, the magnitude of the change and the urgency of the choices we are facing became blindingly clear. Holding up his hands, Duyan lamented the fact that the extraordinary input capabilities of our brains were tethered to such limited and clumsy output devices. He noticed the step backward that we've taken when it comes to typing on our phones, moving from 10 fingers to 2 thumbs. Just imagine how much more efficient we'd be, he said, if we could type with our brains instead, or better yet, operate octopus-like tentacles. Until that day, I had puzzled over how and even whether consumer neurotechnology could go mainstream. The then existing applications of neurotech that enabled us to play video games, meditate, or improve our focus with our minds seemed like niche applications that were unlikely to motivate people to go about their everyday lives. But the wristband that Duyan was describing seemed altogether different. Our brains are constantly transmitting signals to the rest of our body. When I move my hand, for example, the region in my brain called the motor cortex sends an electrical signal to my spinal cord, which distributes a set of signals to the relevant muscles to tell them to move. With its compact and easy to wear form, easy integration into existing wearables, the smartwatches it resembles, an application to interface with other technologies like virtual reality or swiping a smartphone, this device was different in kind from anything I'd ever seen. And that was what really triggered me to write my book when I did. That presentation made me convinced that consumer neurotechnology was going to go mainstream. Had I been a betting person, I would have put a lot of money down that Apple was going to acquire the company. So I was startled when in 2019, Meta acquired them instead for somewhere close to $500 million, even though it's an undisclosed sum. That's what it's been rumored to be. Since that time, every major technology company has invested huge sums of money into consumer wearable neurotechnology with the hope that it will replace our keyboards and our mouse and become the primary way in which we interact with all of the rest of our technology. And I think that there's huge upside potential to finally putting our brain health and wellness on par with all of the rest of our physical health. Most people can tell you what their cholesterol numbers are, even the number of steps that they took per day, what their average resting heart rate is. But very few people know much about their own brains. They can't tell you how long they can focus. They can't tell you where they meditate best or how long they can meditate. They can't tell you what cognitive decline starts to look like, or when they're happiest, or when they're least happy with their environment or with their day. They can't really tell you if they're a morning person or an evening person with any kind of quantifiable data. With brain sensors, that all might be possible. But once we can learn about what's happening in our own brains, so too can corporations and governments. And just like all of the rest of our data has been commodified, suddenly brain data will become fair game. And in fact, it's already begun. Everywhere from China to here in the United States, people are using everyday brain sensors as part of their everyday lives. But in some places, it isn't voluntary. In some employment settings, employers are already requiring individuals to wear brain sensors to track their fatigue levels and their attention. Governments are already using the technology to interrogate criminal suspects to figure out whether or not they recognize some aspects of the crime. I believe that neurotechnology can empower people, that it should empower people, that it can lead to a transformation about what it means to be human. But if and only if we get it right, if and only if, unlike the story that we tell with every other aspect of technology, where the idea is that we're trying to claw back privacy, that we're trying to reset the terms in favor of individuals, if we start this neurotechnology revolution with a set of rights for individuals around our right to cognitive liberty, our right to self-determination over our brains and mental experiences. So what this book does is it lays out the technology that has already arrived, that's already being used in workplaces, in educational settings by governments, the ways in which our brains are already being tracked, can already be enhanced and diminished by ourselves and by others, the way our brains can already and will be manipulated by other people, and what we can do to set the terms of service, the rights we need, the right to cognitive liberty in favor of individuals to enable this set of technological advances, which I believe are so fundamental to what it means to be human, to happen in a way that is the best possible path it could follow, rather than the most oppressive and dystopian one, which it could instead. So that hopefully gives a little bit of an overview, David.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I want to add, for those who are listening in real time, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box and we'll get to them. So I wanted to ask you, about, how well it measures the brain. Like there are sleep apps that I did an article, I was asked by the LA Times to do an article about them. And one sleep specialist said, these sleep apps, they're good, but they really can't tell you if your oxygen level is, going down. They really can't diagnose sleep apnea, because they're not doing an EEG in real time. They're not measuring your blood pressure in real time. So they're kind of like, so it's nice to have this information, but it's not the exact same thing. And I was just wondering, I see ads all the time that you can use your smartphone and take an EEG, but I just wonder, is that, but if you're having
You
a
can't
heart,
use a smartphone to take an EEG. You can use a smartphone maybe to take an ECG, which is heart rate, but not EEG, which is brainwave activity.
Right. Yeah. But even with that, I'm just wondering, it's to really diagnose a heart attack, you have to go in the hospital, you have to take, certain blood tests about enzymes and things. So how sophisticated are the machines?
So it depends on what we're talking about, right? If we're talking about consumer wearable devices,
yes,
then some of, it depends on a lot of things.
Okay.
For what purpose we are talking about, right? So if we're talking about, can you wear a few electrodes on your head, and can that produce a thought bubble above your head that tells me exactly what you're thinking? The answer is absolutely not, and they'd be very poorly suited for that purpose. If you want to know if a person is paying attention or their mind is wandering, it's very good at doing that. But it depends on the device. It depends on where the sensors are placed. It depends on how well the sensors are placed. What we've had over the past decade is extraordinary advances, both in the sensors as well as in artificial intelligence that can decode brain activity. And so we've collected over time, and I shouldn't say we, I'm just somebody who studies it. I'm not somebody who actually does it, right? So we as a society have over the past decade, made tremendous advances in engineering. The miniaturization of electrodes, the ability to do things like filter out noise and muscle twitches, and then AI advances in being able to study and understand what those brain patterns mean that at least a lot of simple brain states can be decoded with significant accuracy. So I think when you ask how good are they, it depends on what you're trying to use them for. If you're trying to use them to literally understand everything a person is thinking and feeling, they're very poor at that. If you're trying to understand a number of different brain states, they're increasingly quite accurate at doing so.
Well, I want to talk about fatigue as a measurement because you point out that there are a lot of engineers who fall asleep on the trains, or truck drivers who fall asleep and cause terrible accidents. And I think it's very useful for that. But I do wonder about measuring, like they do in China and other places, measuring school children's fatigue, or even school children's daydreaming. And because daydreaming has some uses, and and not everyone is the same. So I do worry about that a little bit, especially the China. Why don't you tell me about what China is doing?
Sure. So first, when you worry about accuracy, I would say we should all worry about that, especially depending on what it's being used for, right? And so if I'm using a brain wearable at home to meditate well, and it's not particularly accurate, but what I'm doing is trying to meditate, I'm not too worried about how accurate it is, because the risk of harm to me from meditating and not getting feedback that says you're in a meditative state is very low. If we're talking about using it, for example, as some companies are trying to develop and use it for, which is to detect epileptic seizures from happening, we should care a lot if somebody is relying upon it for medical and therapeutic reasons, that it be incredibly accurate at detecting those seizures, not having false positives, and certainly not having false negatives. In China, we can worry for a number of reasons about the way that they're applying it. First is how reportedly they're applying it, which is requiring factory workers and train conductors and even school children to wear brain sensors as part of their everyday activities. For the train conductor for the Beijing-Shanghai high-speed trail line, the busiest of its kind in the world, train conductors are required to wear caps that have brain sensors embedded in it that track their fatigue level, their attention levels, and even their emotional levels. Now, in some ways, fatigue level measurements has been validated over a very long period of time. And a person who is a commercial driver or a commercial pilot or a train conductor, we should want to know if they're awake or if they're asleep, right? The cost of accidents are quite high, and we already integrate quite a few measures into trying to track attention levels and focus levels and fatigue levels in a setting like that. Even tracking emotion levels, there are certain emotion levels where it is highly accurate to do so. The concern is using that in ways that are discriminatory against the person. So first, of course, is analytic validity. How good is the data that you're collecting? And the second is, how are you using it? And if you're using it in order to, as an oppressive tool of surveillance, if you're using it as a tool to try to make people worry about their mind wandering or worry about what their thoughts could reveal, or telling them, for example, that we are monitoring your thoughts, and if you think dissident thoughts, you will be punished, the very chilling effect of using that on individuals is quite powerful, no matter how accurate it is. The Wall Street Journal reported several years ago that in one classroom in China, at least, a group of students were being required to wear headsets as part of their classroom experience to track their attention. And attention and fatigue are different measurements. Here, the idea was, how focused are you? There was a red light, an orange light, and a green light. And a US-based company, BrainCo, had shipped thousands of these devices already to China. And I think giving students in today's distracted world different tools to help them focus is not innately bad. I use a tool like this one, for focus, just a simple timer, which is I get distracted pretty easily, especially with young kids and with many different screens up in front of me and email and other dings and notifications. So when I want to do a concentrated period of writing, I'll say like, okay, I'm doing 60 minutes, not allowing anything else to distract me during that time. And I take it and I turn it upright. And if I have it on 60, I'll get a 60-minute timer, and it's a useful tool for self-governance. That's different than somebody putting sensors on my head and saying, you have to focus for 60 minutes. And if your mind wanders, that information is being sent to the teacher in the front of the room. It's being sent to your parents, and it's being sent to the state. And who said focusing all the time is a good thing? To David's point, periods of mind wandering are critical for things like imagination and curiosity, for stress levels in the brain, for insights that we gain. It turns out most of the major insights that we gain are not from periods of long focus, but from periods of mind wandering and breaks. And so there's a risk when you're using things like brain sensors, especially in a mandated setting, especially in a surveillance setting, that not only are we measuring the wrong thing, but we are we're trying to force people to conform to a norm that isn't even better for human flourishing. It's worse for human flourishing, because we're driving people away from the very things that could benefit from humanity. So that gives us a little bit of a flavor. There's a lot more happening in China that I talk about in the book, David, but hopefully that answers some of the basics about what's happening there.
Okay, so I just want to cover, let's talk about brain fingerprinting. And first of all, explain what that is.
Yeah. So I don't remember the exact year now. I'd have to look back, but there is it goes back all the way to some experiments by a scientist by the name of Benjamin Libet, where the idea was to figure out questions of intentionality. Like we have a sense of, I say like, David, raise your right hand. You will raise your right hand and you feel like that's entirely within your conscious control. Like at the moment you have the thoughts, you then raise your hand. Question is, before you have the experience of choosing, if there's pre-conscious signals in your brain that can be detected. And Benjamin Libet designed this experiment where there were left click buttons and right click buttons. And he told the participants, whenever you have the urge to click the left click button or the right click button, take a notice of the time. There was a timer in front of them, and then push the button. And when he did these experiments while monitoring their brains, what he found was that almost every time there was a pre-conscious signal about 200 to 400 milliseconds before the person was aware of the urge to push a button, and that pre-conscious signal correlated to something called a P300 signal, a particular waveform that you can detect in the brain. And researchers later thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we could see if that pre-conscious signal applies to other things? Like if I were to ask you if you recognize something, could I use the pre-conscious signal before you're even aware of that recognition and use that to try to figure out if you committed a crime? And so a researcher and scientist by the name of Larry Farwell started to test this, where he would develop probes from like a criminal case file. He'd go into a police record and he would look for a fact that only the defendant should know. And then he would show them those pictures or images and look at their brain activity to figure out if that pre-conscious signal, that P300, could be detected in ones that they recognized versus ones that they didn't. And he developed this technique, and ultimately the US government helped to fund it, law enforcement tried it out, and now it's being sold by a company called Brainwave Sciences to a lot of different law enforcement agencies worldwide who are using it to interrogate criminal suspects, to interrogate their brains, to try to figure out if they can recognize different aspects of the crime. It'd be interesting to try it out on Alex Murdaugh and, see what he actually knew or didn't know, but.
Yeah. So you also touch on Elon Musk and his company Neuralink, but I believe this week the FDA they pushed back on it.
Yeah. So I go through individual uses of the technology. I go through government uses of the technology. I go through corporate uses of the technology. And then I have a chapter called Beyond Human. And Beyond Human really explores what happens when we're not just talking about consumer wearables, but we're talking about things like implanted neurotechnology, like Neuralink or BlackRock Neurotech. There's a number of companies who are using this. There are about 40 people worldwide right now that have implanted neurotechnology, BCI, brain-computer interface, as part of clinical trials to help restore for them movement or speech. And Neuralink has not yet gained FDA approval to go forward in those clinical trials. These other companies are further ahead, but Elon Musk's ambition, that is to both make it possible to have it be a safer device that is smaller, miniaturized, and easier to get into the brain, but also to move beyond using it for healthy individuals, but to use it in a more widespread way for, not just use it for people who need it for paralysis or for speech prosthesis, but to use it in healthy brains. I think we have a long time till we get there. But just the very fact that he's in the field, I think, is really pushing everybody forward more quickly and bringing a lot of attention and investment into neurotechnology.
So you also talk about your brain. You have a chapter called Your Brain at Work. And you talk about corporate wellness programs, and one of them is Aetna, which has invested heavily in a corporate wellness program called Mindfulness at Work more than a decade ago. Employees who participate in the program, which included mindfulness training, a dedicated calming space for employees, and regular speaker series, enjoy substantial reductions in stress. Aetna has rolled it out worldwide, and more than 20,000 employees now participate in it. These are good things, I guess. I've worked at companies where they have wellness centers where you can go if you're not feeling well, but they promote, prevention through vaccinations and all kinds of other kinds of things, and blood pressure checks and all these things. So, do you think that this will be a mainstream in most corporations?
Yeah, so I talk about the wellness programs because it's already being integrated into a lot of brain wellness programs. There are brain wellness programs. The programs have, I think, a possibility of helping people to reduce their stress levels, which again, I think is an incredibly valuable thing to do. But I do worry quite a bit about how those wellness programs are structured for employees and whether or not the data that's being collected as part of those wellness programs are protected or could be used, for example, by employers, mined for things like cognitive decline over time. Unfortunately, wellness programs don't sit with the same kinds of protections that our health care does. So if you see a doctor, your employer doesn't get access to the information in your medical records, but wellness programs aren't protected in that same way because they're not classified as health records, and they don't fall within the protections of HIPAA that would give you some of those safeguards. So I worry about the misuse of brain data in those programs, but I think, again, the possibility of focusing on brain health and wellness, if done well, could be beneficial for individuals.
And before I turn over to questions, because I wanted to ask also about, you have a chapter called Revving Up, and we talk about a recent study revealed that the rate at which healthy people take brain-enhancing drugs nearly tripled between 2015 and 2017, from approximately 5% to almost 14%. In the United States, nearly 1 in 5 respondents had used a brain-enhancing drug, from prescription drugs for ADHD, like Adderall and Ritalin, to narcolepsy medications, and even stimulants like cocaine. And we also talk about, dietary supplements that people take. If you watch CNN, Prevagen is advertised quite a lot, and Omega, all these things. What are your thoughts about? When I was in college, people used to take no-dose to stay awake and study all night. And no one said, well, that's a terrible thing that you're doing. So for a person who, we talked about this before we came on, about doctors who, take Adderall to improve their attention, and they pass their medical boards, and then they're practicing, and then you kind of wonder, well, how smart are they really? So that is a question. Do you see anything wrong with the person taking Adderall, before a test, just to improve their attention?
So for me, the question is the way that we're treating it in society, which is to say that it is cheating to take that
Right.
drug.
Yeah.
Is that a good way to characterize it? And I think the answer is no. I think that what we do as humans is try to improve our capacities and our experiences, to try to expand our minds, to expand what we can do. And if a person takes Adderall, which increases their attention or their focus or their ability to learn more quickly, I don't think that that's inherently wrong from a cheating perspective. I don't think that we should treat it that way. There may be other reasons that we choose to regulate it. It may be that methamphetamines are highly addictive. It may be that that addiction is something that is difficult, if not impossible, to overcome. For health reasons, we make choices all the time about the balance between individual rights and societal rights. But focusing on health is very different than focusing on cheating and calling a person a cheater for trying to expand their brain. It's a different kind of justification, and one that the way to address it would be by focusing on whether or not there are safer and more effective drugs that could do the same thing, rather than categorizing every attempt to try to enhance our brains and our mental experiences as cheating. So I take real issue with the way in which it's been characterized and treated at universities and at colleges, the way that we make it become an underground and black market process, the way that the inequitable distribution of the drugs occur as a result, because students who are wealthier, who have parents who can help them get the prescriptions that they need, are more competitive than those who aren't. I think it has a lot of negative side effects for society by mischaracterizing the problem to begin with.
Well, I mean, athletes we know are measured for drugs, and sometimes, if certain drugs are banned by the Olympic committees and tennis associations, basketball, sports, and if they're found with these drugs. And I remember one newscaster said, I go to a baseball game, I want to see people hitting home runs.
Yeah.
So I don't care if it's shrinking their testicles or if it's, going to cause long-term brain damage. He said, I don't care. I just want to go see home runs. And
Well, I mean, and we've chosen otherwise in society, which is fine to choose, right? I mean, I think we as a society have decided that what we want for sports is to celebrate people who've won the genetic lottery and who are able to work to hone the natural endowments that they've been given. I don't think we can make that same kind of choice when it comes to our brains. I think that life is not a game, and that treating it as if it's zero sum and preventing people from being able to enhance their brains and mental experiences, that the rules from sports just sit and apply. The rules from sports are kind of an artificially constrained area. And we could decide differently. We could be like your friends and decide, actually, what we really want to watch is schmaceball, where everybody takes steroids and everybody hits home runs all the time. And that's more fun for us. That's, with a game, we could change the rules if we wanted to.
Yeah. And also, I mean, even natural athletes, if they come from wealthy families, they have advantages. They can have trainers, therapists. They can have a lot of people now have mental coaches that they travel with. And if you're poor, you don't have that.
Right.
So it's it's not just the ability to take it. So let's take some questions. I like this first one. This is terrifying. I hope you testify to Congress. I have no hope we will get ahead of this in terms of human rights. You are right that we should. What would it all look like that protected us from this, whatever this is?
Yeah. So, first, I hope that my message isn't one of terror. I hope what my message is a wake-up call, which is widespread use of neurotechnology is here, and it is coming, and it is going to be transformative for humanity. And it can be incredibly oppressive. It can be incredibly problematic. But there are, I believe, it's a wake-up call to us about the need to adopt a right to cognitive liberty. And that's one of the things that I lay down in the book, is the normative and the legal case for what a right to cognitive liberty would look like. As I conceive of it, the right to cognitive liberty is the right to self-determination over our brains and mental experiences. That's an international human right. And it's a human right that, if recognized, would also direct the updating of the three rights that make it up, which are the right to mental privacy, the right to freedom of thought, and the right to self-determination. The right to mental privacy would be just an explicitly recognized part of our existing right to privacy. Freedom of thought, there's already very exciting work that's been done by the former mandate holder of the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Belief and Religion, which was Dr. Ahmed Shahid, who presented his findings to the UN General Assembly in 2021, arguing that our concept of freedom of thought has been very narrowly focused on freedom of religion, and we should really expand that to have it address the coming age of neurotechnology and the digital age in which our brains can be hacked and tracked. And we ought to have protections against punishment for our thoughts or manipulation of our thoughts. And then the last is the right to self-determination, which is the right to, right? So those first two are the right from neurotechnologies being used against us to interfere with our brain and mental experiences. And the right to self-determination would give us a right of self-access to our brain activity and our brain data, self-determination over the right to rev our brains up or slow our brains down, and raises the hard questions of who gets to decide when the kinds of changes that we want to adopt are really transformational for humanity, and how will we think about that?
Okay, interesting questions. Informed consent becomes an issue in children, severely mentally ill and institutionalized. What are your thoughts on informed consent issues and the use of neurotechnology as requirements on jobs?
Yeah, so informed consent is a huge issue in the employment setting regardless, where 80% of employers have, since the pandemic, said that they are now using kind of pejoratively called bossware or surveillance technology as part of the workplace. And having that as part of the workplace means that workers and their productivity and their movements and even their webcams are being monitored nearly all the time by employers. Having brain activity monitored all the time is even more problematic, both because it is so incredibly sensitive, but also because of these questions like, what about a person who is not neurotypical? What about a person who is having the technology used when they don't have the capacity to give fully informed consent, like a child or a person who is severely and mentally ill or institutionalized? And so I don't rely heavily on consent as part of the model that I've built around cognitive liberty, my conception of what it is. Other people do rely more on consent. And the reason I don't rely as much on consent is that consent is often almost like a checkbox these days. I think consent is important, but we rely on it to do too much work in the protection of individuals. And I think we need a bigger set of rights to protect people rather than consent alone.
So in your book, I mentioned Elon Musk. I wanted to go to the other direction. You mentioned the Dalai Lama was kind of, came to science and said, I'd like to know what's going on in the brain. I know with meditators, in the 1970s, when Benson wrote his book about the relaxation response, they measured their respiration and their blood pressure went down and all these things. But he said, I don't know what goes on in the mind of meditators.
Right.
And that was very interesting that he would be interested in that.
Yeah. I mean, so I write about, the study of monks and meditation and kind of all the interesting things that we've learned as a result of that, and how that information can help people who want to meditate and want to learn how to meditate more effectively, and also just what it tells us about brain health and wellness. So there's a lot of interesting insights that we can learn from the brain, a lot of transformational insights that can really help humanity. If we put the technology to those uses, if we put the technology to really addressing the causes of neurological disease and suffering, it can immensely benefit humanity.
Okay. So someone wrote, there's a company in Melbourne, Australia that is paying people Australian dollars, 50 Australian dollars for an hour to wear a brain scanning cap to measure their response to advertisements in a video or quick images to respond to. I wonder if this affected your own brain, as I did it once and it gave me a headache.
So, I mean, maybe concentrating, I don't think the device, I don't know what the devices are that they were using, but most of these devices are reading, not writing devices. And by that, what I mean is it can pick up activity, but it's not also sending electrical currents back into the brain. So if somebody wears a brain scanning cap, I'll show you like a lot of these neuro marketing companies are using something like this, which has electrodes, these are electrodes, and then behind the ear for the grounding. So if they're wearing something like this, what it's doing is it's picking up the electrical activity, but it's not also sending any electrical activity back into the brain. Nevertheless, concentrating images that somebody is showing on a computer screen, all of these things can trigger headaches. Not more so because the neurotechnology is being worn. There are other different devices like transcranial direct current stimulation that could be used that are writing devices that actually give stimulation. That's a device like this, for example, worn here can actually give you neurostimulation rather than reading. This doesn't read, this writes to the brain. Those can, for some people, cause headaches. They're designed for a lot of people to try to prevent or to address headaches.
I use the Fisher Wallace stimulator. Chip Fisher is a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And we used to do these broadcasts live in his house, and I find it very relaxing. But one person said, the minute I used it, I got a headache, and I'm thinking, the exact minute you used it, I thought that was, they were probably nervous before they started. I don't know.
Yeah.
So someone else wrote, which is not a question, says, brain enhancing drugs are a form of doping. And in my opinion, cheating for those who otherwise would not need said drugs. Those not needing a prescription to stick with caffeine, that also enhances concentration.
Yeah. And some people believe that, and they believe that because that's the narrative I think that we've created in society, is that anything that enhances your ability to concentrate or learn or stay awake even longer is so-called doping, and that doping itself carries and does the normative work. I'll be interested when that person reads the book, which I hope they will, what they think about the arguments that I make, because I do tackle and take on those arguments and think that really we need to reframe the debate. I disagree. I think reasonable people can come out differently on the issue. But I feel strongly that we have conflated sports and cognitive enhancement.
Yeah, I think so. So here's a question which I kind of like, because when I heard that Meta bought one of these things, and and I mean Bill Maher and John Oliver talk about when Facebook first started, everyone thought it was very innocent, and now we realize that it's shaping people's political opinions. Twitter certainly, and Instagram and TikTok are causing depression in children. They're TikTok is now going to limit children under a certain age to an hour.
Right.
Good luck with that. I'm sure there's,
especially if they can actually like validate them, and
I'm sure there's a workaround already. Right. So how do companies paying for the research benefit from the research?
So if we're talking about a company who's doing neuromarketing, and that is they're using brain-based responses to better understand consumer behavior, the way they benefit is that for a very long time, marketers and marketing research professionals have known that self-reports are inaccurate. That is, that people say that this is what they like, or this is what they do, or this is what they would buy, and that doesn't track as well to consumer behavior. And so if you really want to know how engaging a person finds a particular advertisement, or how fearful they are of a movie scene that you're trying to make very fearful or very exciting, or if it invokes the kinds of feelings that you're trying to invoke in them, excitement, passion, things that you want to avoid, boredom, for example, tracking brain activity while people are watching those advertisements, or seeing the degree of engagement or immersion that they have based on brain activities, is believed to be a more objective measure. And the bottom line for companies has been, they've seen an increase in sales. They've seen it translate into, better engagement, better ratings, better enthusiasm for the particular movie scenes that they're trying to change. So the idea is that the brain tells the truth more than the person does. And that's how companies benefit, is by getting what they believe to be more objective evidence about their products, the movie scenes, everything that they're trying to test out.
Okay. This is from a friend of mine who's a lawyer. You can tell by the question. Is it possible that cognitive liberty can be defended by developing mental techniques that defeat technological methods to read our thoughts, for example, by consciously thinking things that are obscure or even real thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, so the answer is yes, but so like, for example, I underwent a research study at Stanford where I was in a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine. And what they were trying to do was test my recognition of different images. So they would show me a picture that I've seen before, and then they would look at my brain-based response to see whether or not they could pick up recognition from my brain using fMRI. And then they told me to defeat the machine. That was to actively try, like they put the image back up, and that I should actively try to defeat it, consciously overcome it. And that brought down the accuracy by quite a bit. And I was able to do things like just focus my attention elsewhere, or conjure up a pink elephant in my brain and think about the pink elephants to distract away from the images that they were showing me. So really just by like not paying attention to what they were showing me, I could bring the accuracy of brain probing down quite a bit. So definitely neural countermeasures to decoding the brain when you are aware that it is happening can be effective. But that's not the future that's coming, right? The future that's coming is a future in which the earbuds that you use, and I don't mean future as in like 5 years from now, I mean future as in they've just launched one of the products. Meta is launching their watch in 2025. Emotive MN8 is starting to sell their earbuds which allow you to listen to music and take a conference call while having your brainwave activity. Neurable is launching their headphones with brain sensors in the cups around it, which are with a major headphone manufacturer that allow you to listen to music while having your brainwave activity monitored. So it's not that you're going to be spending all day long counteracting that if you choose to wear those devices, and then that brain data is being collected while you're on Facebook or on WhatsApp or on TikTok, and that data is collected by the same company who is showing you those images. They can pick up and understand and decode your brain activity along with whatever images you're seeing, which means that they also can change the images and see how that changes your behavior. So I think if we're thinking about it in the sense of intentionally interrogating a person and can they use countermeasures, the answer is yes. But if they're passively using it all day, every day, and not even aware of the probing of their brain that is occurring, it's very difficult to have effective countermeasures.
Okay. Another question, and thank you everyone for asking questions. Are we close to having brain technologies commercially available, for example, to patients with migraines to help predict when they kick in and how they develop?
I hope so. I'm a chronic migrainer.
Okay.
I get pretty good indications myself already. I have auras, I have early signals of it. I use neurotechnology in part to try to meditate and as a preventive measure. I don't know of any commercial development yet for being able to detect early migraines. What I do know of, which is related, is in epilepsy. So there are companies that are using headsets and using brain sensors that can be integrated into everyday technology. There's one company I write about in the book called Epinas out of Israel, who are in clinical trials to test what they have, they believe is the ability to predict an epileptic seizure an hour before it occurs. And that would be transformational for epileptics if you could actually have that kind of early, accurate warning about the onset of a seizure. Migraines, maybe not as transformational unless we get to the point where having that early warning allows early intervention to prevent the migraine. But I suspect that in the same way that we'll be able to do it for epilepsy, we'll be able to do it for migraine as well. What I hope then is that there'll be just-in-time treatments, because I still get side effects from most of the drugs that I take for my migraines.
So all these things, like Apple watches, Samsung watches, all these things. I got a Samsung watch, and for a week I said, I don't need this. But some people, swear by it. They take phone calls on them.
Yeah.
Um,
I hated having a smartwatch. My sister gave me an old one that she had a couple of years ago for Christmas. And she was like, I got one. Why don't you wear this one? I wore it for about a week. And I have a hard enough time already being disconnected from my phone, right? Just being like able to just totally focus and just be with my children and be with my family, be present, read a book. And I would get these alerts on my watch and my wrist would buzz, and it was impossible not to look down at it. And I did not like that. And so I gave it back to her and I said, thank you very much. You can give this to a friend. I think I'm already hyper connected enough. I would rather not have a watch on my wrist at all times. So.
But I guess the point I was making was that they're not cheap. And is neurotechnology going to be only for, people who can afford neurotechnology devices?
I mean, like most technology in the beginning, it probably is going to be expensive and not something that everybody is going to be able to afford. Already, a lot of the basic headsets are pretty inexpensive relative to other kinds of technology. We're not talking about like iPhone level costs. We're talking about $100 for a headset that can pick up basic brainwave activity. I think if the choice is that a person is going to buy a pair of earbuds, or they're going to buy a pair of earbuds that have brain sensors in them, and they're talking about a nominal difference in cost, it may not be, so expensive. I see a question up from one of the attendees asking like if it's going to be possible to buy them without them, like to have a hearing aid that doesn't have brain sensors. And I think just like you can buy a watch that doesn't have an ECG sensor in it today, and that there are smartwatches, some of which have integrated sensors and some of which don't, I think there's still going to continue to be those kinds of choices. And I think some people will opt to not have brain sensors. I don't think it's going to be like everybody's going to live in a future in which the only option you have is to wear a brain sensor or not. I do think a lot of people are going to opt for it. I do think a lot of people, once the applications grow and once the ability to track it on brain health and wellness grow, I think a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, I could either have the earbuds or I could have the earbuds that give me a lot of real-time information about my brain functioning. And I think people are going to choose to want to see their brain functioning. And that's the future in which I, think we're going to find ourselves very quickly, which is why I advocate for us to adopt a right to cognitive liberty now, so that 5 years from now, we're not looking back and saying, oh, I wish the terms of service were different. I wish all of our brain data hadn't been commodified. I wish our last bastion of privacy was still standing. It still can be in 5 years if we make the right choices now.
So there are two films I think about when I, reading this book. One was 2001, where with the astronauts in, and the other is Minority Report.
Yeah. Well, I write about a Minority Report, and I will tell you, like, it is, it's what I start, my criminal law class with often. And these days, my students have never heard of Minority Report. And so I have to both tell them what it is, play the trailer for it, and then tell them that they really need to go watch it, because I'm going to make reference to it a lot. The idea of thought crimes, and if that's a future that we really want. And I feel like it is still a timely and good movie to push people to think about these problems. In 2001, I think a lot of us are thinking about 2001 these days in the era of generative AI. And when you think about the fact that most of these devices are going to be powered by, they already are powered by AI, but generative AI will become a critical part of it, right? Part of the reason that you'll be able to type with these devices is because of the predictive text capabilities of AI. And so I think, okay, I want to send a quick text message to my husband and say like, I say, hi, honey. And then the generative AI completes, what do you want to do for dinner for me? Right. I don't have to like type it out because it predicts what it is given the time of day and given who I'm sending the message to and given the patterns of activity that I've had in the past. And that can go wrong. That can go Orwellian. That can go to the place of saying, I can't do that. How?
Well, Gmail, says, I start typing this and then it starts finishing the sentences for me.
Yes.
I'm a writer, I don't really need your help, thank you.
Right.
But,
right.
It is good. And, and pretty soon, we're going to have open chat. We're going to do a segment on that at some point, but I want to wait a little bit. Next week, we're actually going to talk about the lab leak theory with Dr. John Moore of Weill Cornell, who's a virologist, and that should be good. So why don't you show your book again?
All right. The Battle for Your Brain, Defending Your Right to Think Freely in the Age of Neurotechnology, comes out on Tuesday. Would be so grateful for people to engage with it, pre-order the book. Consider it, share it with your friends. You tell even just one friend about it and tell them that you're intrigued and that you want them to be intrigued. I think that we can make a real difference in the conversation about a right to cognitive liberty.
Well, all our interviews go on YouTube. So a lot of people see them there. I mean, because people are going out now and doing things. This is not like the first days when we're doing this. So we have a big YouTube following. So we will get, and we will on our website, we'll be promoting it. So they can get, I know they can get it on Amazon, but where else can you get it?
You can get it anywhere books are sold. I really like indie bookstores and think it's important that we support them. So I encourage you to go to a local indie bookstore and ask for it. You can always go to the public library and ask them for a copy as well. But anywhere books are sold, you can order The Battle for Your Brain, Defending the Right to Think Freely in the Age of Neurotechnology.
Okay. Good plug for it. Thank you. Anyway, I want to thank you for spending an hour with us. And the book is really great. It's very readable and makes me think about it. And as Thomas Insel, who used to be the head of the National Institute of Mental Health, says, Farahany poses critical questions that can guide us as we navigate the hope and hype around neurotechnology. A must read. He is now the author. He's the author of Healing and co-director of President Obama's Brain Initiative. So that's a high praise indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Stay safe out there. And again, thank you for spending time with us. And
thank you. Thank you all for joining. It was a pleasure.
And buy the book, and we'll see you next week with Dr. Moore to speak about the lab leak. Okay, take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night.